Hi, and welcome back to the Holistic Life podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of meeting two wonderful people who will talk about something which affects all of us, negative thoughts. And when they get very, very loud, they can even lead to what it's called in our daily world for mental illnesses. We have with us Jerry Marzinsky, who is a retired licensed psychotherapist with over 40 years of experience working with and studying the thought processes and the voices heard by psychotic and criminally insane patients in some of the most volatile psychiatric institutions in United States. He was awarded the State of Arizona's Meritorious Service Award while working in the psychology department of a large state prison. He has several awards, and I will put them in the description. He also wrote a wonderful book that I recommend everybody to read because it gives us a exceptional insight into the psychotic mind. The book is called An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind. All the links and the descriptions of these are put in the description below. And also we have with us Judy Gregerson, and she will give us a testimony of healing from schizophrenia. She's a powerful voice for those battling mental illnesses, spiritual oppressions, and the search for true emotional freedom. Having personally endured the torment of schizophrenia and the four voices that taunted her day and night, Judy found complete and lasting freedom in an extraordinary way, and she will tell us about it in the next minutes that we will spend together. I will encourage you also to read her books. She is the author of 3 books, and I will put all the necessary links to her webpage and the books so that you can have access to them. And with this in mind, let's start our discussion. And I really hope that this will help a lot of people understand what they're dealing with when they hear negative, when they have negative thoughts and they hear weird voices. And even when they hear these voices as their own, we all need to understand what the negative thoughts are and how we can get rid of them, because there is hope and there is a solution to it.
Okay, my name is Jerry Marzinsky. I've spoke with Georgiana before, and I've spent, close to over 45 years on the front lines of mental health in the United States. I've worked in virtually every type of mental institution there is over here. Uh, One of the biggest state hospitals, state psychiatric hospitals on the planet, I started off with. I've worked in emergency rooms doing psych crisis for the last 10 years. I spent 18 years working on the psychology department of a large state prison. I've been a contractor. I'm now a private therapist, MACE therapist. And I've been studying the voices that schizophrenics hear for the entire time. Um, when I first started off, I was told, like everybody else, that the voices were hallucinations. Um, That's what they teach in graduate school. That's what psychiatry believes. That's what they got in the DSM. Because at face value, they don't seem to make any sense. Okay? Um, the deeper I got into studying them, the more apparent it became that they were not hallucinations. These things were entities. They were negative parasitic entities. Um,
What made you come up to that conclusion?
well, first of all, when I started questioning patients in the state hospital about their voices, uh, they started telling me that The voices did not like church. They hated the 23rd Psalm. One of the clients said that when they repeated the 23rd Psalm, the voices acted like they were thrown on a hot frying pan. They didn't like going to church. I've had, a number of patients said when I went to church, the voices got louder. They drowned out whatever the preacher was trying to say. So I started doing some research on that, and it turned out that was consistent among many schizophrenics. The voices did not like anything to do with God, church, prayer, reading the Bible. And what kind of hallucination would do that?
Exactly. Hallucinations don't have an opinion on something like that.
No, they don't. So here's psychiatry without having done any research into what these voices were at all. None. Just like the old Egyptian priests of old, they just come up and go, we're psychiatrists. We hereby pronounce that the voices are hallucinations without having done any research whatsoever. And then they just proceeded from there. So that, okay, that's part of schizophrenia. And what they do with them is they just drug these people silly. That's their treatment is these drugs. And these drugs have horrible, horrible side effects. Uh, that
Do the
some of the,
drugs work on the entities? Because
well,
I can
they,
imagine if you have hallucinations, then with drugs you get some chemical balance in your brain. But with
no,
voices,
see,
entities,
that's a lie too. They came up, the chemical imbalance theory was formulated by a um, Eli Lilly. It's a drug company. So, you know, here I have a little statement on that. It says it was not until the late 1980s, after the release of the landmark antidepressant Prozac, that the idea of the chemical imbalance as a reason for mental illness and schizophrenia, that the chemical imbalance theory hit the psychiatric mainstream. As psychiatrist Peter Brigham in 1991 points out in his book Toxic Psychiatry, the drug company Eli Lilly advanced the chemical imbalance theory as a marketing scheme to sell their new drug Prozac. There was no demonstrable evidence showing that depressed patients or schizophrenic patients had any chemical imbalance, but Eli Lilly ran with it. They had lots of money. They put it up in their advertisements. They put it into uh, their fake research. They put it up in journals. Before long, psychiatrists and psychiatric patients alike came to identify with the idea that the mental disorders were caused by a chemical imbalance of the brain. It was an absolute abject lie. It was designed to sell drugs. So here we are talking about some of these drugs. So what these people are doing is they're not treating the cause of the illness. What they're doing is drugging the brain. So the voices don't like the drugs, and it's the voices that cause paranoid schizophrenia. If the voices disappear, if they can be gotten rid of by any means, all symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia disappear with them. They are the cause of paranoid schizophrenia. Of course, the psychiatric mafia doesn't want to hear this. They're making what, $3.4 billion a year selling antipsychotic drugs. They want nothing to do with a cure. They just want to do the continuous treatments. Now, these drugs,
but
and
this is terrible. This is terrible
it's a
because
scam.
I can imagine there are quite a few people who are diagnosed with this. This is terrible because you can cure them and instead you just keep them drugged.
That's what it does. It keeps them drugged. So they're only treating the symptoms. Now, the drugs they're using for the symptoms, these are just some of the side effects: dizziness, drowsiness, anxiety, sleep problems, insomnia, breast swelling or discharge, changes in menstrual periods, weight gain, swelling in the hands and feet, dry mouth, stuffy nose, blurred vision, constipation, akinesia, it's this uncontrolled shaking. And they found what they found with these antipsychotic drugs is they started doing autopsies on patients that were in mental hospitals for long periods of time taking these drugs. They found that their brains were shrunk like walnuts.
Oh
And
no.
and what they did was the researchers, of course, they weren't associated with big pharma. They were independent researchers, published this. And it was lucky they were even able to get it into journals, because usually the psychiatric mafia would ban something like that. They would not allow it to be published. So when they published this, the psychiatric mafia and the big pharma went, "Oh no, no, it's not our drugs that are causing this. It's the schizophrenia that's shrinking their brain." And so the researcher says, "Okay, you know, we'll go back and we'll do some more research on this." So they started feeding these antipsychotic phenothiazines to rats and mice and monkeys, and found with long enough administration of these drugs. Now, psychiatry is telling these patients, schizophrenics, that this is a lifelong disease. There is no cure. You have to take their drugs for the rest of your life. Okay. What these researchers found, that it shrunk the brains of the mice, the monkeys, and the rats also. Right? So that,
Which, of course, they didn't have schizophrenia or paranoia.
no, but that's the effect it had on their brains.
Yeah,
Okay.
because I'm just being a little bit sarcastic. Otherwise, the researchers can say it's because of schizophrenia and the chemical imbalance in the brain. This is why it shrank.
Right. Well, that's what they were trying to do. So um, schizophrenia, what they would do is they drug the symptoms. It wasn't curing anything. They was just gorking them out. So what these drugs are is major tranquilizers. So here they are giving these things to, you know, thousands of people. And they've been doing that since these things came onto the market. So despite the fact that there's more psychiatric drugs on the market right now than in the history of mankind, there's more psychiatrists on the planet now than there ever has been. There's more psychologists on the planet than there has ever been. In last year, close to 50,000 Americans killed themselves. Most of them were on antidepressant or some other kind of psychiatric drugs. There's only 50,000 died during the Vietnam War. Between 1999 and 2019, the suicide rate here in the United States increased 33%.
We have been speaking about this previously in our interviews, Jerry, and you said that one recurrent aspect with these voices is that they were pushing people to take their own life.
Yes. Yep. That's what they would tell them. Kill yourself. You're no good. You're rotten. You're ugly. You're stupid. Um, and the patterns that the voices ran. Okay. Now this was interesting. I started finding patterns to these voices. So when I got to work in the state prison, that's where I was able to do the most research with them, because I was able to form groups of prisoners who were hearing voices, who would talk to me in real time about what the voices were telling them while we were in session. So it was like having a bird's eye view right into their mind. They would tell me what the voices were telling them. They would tell me how the voices were reacting to what I was saying. They would tell me what the voices were, uh, how they reacted to the homework I gave them to fight back against the voices. So what started emerging was a pattern to these voices. They were consistent.
Hallucination cannot have patterns.
Right. That's exactly right. Hallucinations are random. So here's psychiatry saying the voices are hallucinations, but there's patterns to them. Now, these patterns can be found on my website at jerrymarzinsky.com under articles. But here's just the first few. These voices are consistently negative. They're not positive, they're not neutral. So hallucinations, some are positive, some are negative, some are neutral. They're all over the place. They don't run any patterns. They're random. The voices are consistently negative. They don't say hardly anything positive unless they're trying to trick the person into believing they're somebody good. And if they succeed in that, they turn on them later. But the major pattern is that they're negative. So my first question when I saw that time after time after time with hundreds of schizophrenics, they were consistently negative. What holds them onto a negative pattern? Why aren't they why aren't they random like all other kinds of hallucinations? Why are they consistently negative? That was the first pattern I saw. Second pattern was they were anti-religious. They're consistently anti-religious. They resist the patients attending church, reading the Bible, or following any other kind of positive spiritual path. They become volatile, nasty, and abusive when they try to go to church or pray. They hate the 23rd Psalm. I had patients tell me that the voices react to the 23rd Psalm like worms thrown on a hot frying pan.
Again, hallucination couldn't have opinions
Yeah,
on religion.
that's right. So they foster and create negative emotion. They want to generate that negative emotion. And then what I saw was that after they generate the crescendo, the patient's energy is just sucked from them. I've had some of the prisoners tell me that they could actually feel their energy leaving them while these voices were attacking them.
So
So there was a
basically, if I can draw a conclusion, it means that the voices are being very negative, making people feel, of course, very bad. And this energy of feeling bad, it's somehow the entity's food.
That's right. That's exactly right. They live off of this negative emotional energy. So that's why the voices never say anything good. That's why they're constantly battering the person, saying, "You're no good, you're rotten, you're stupid, you're ugly, nobody loves you, you're crazy," all that kind of stuff. They want to generate that negative emotion, and that's what they feed off of. You know, um, they foster self-destructive behavior. They foster isolation. Uh, uh, they demand the attention of the victim. They lie, they cheat, they gaslight. You can't trust anything they say. They demand the victim not tell anybody about them. And there's 23 patterns on my website. They get louder if it's ignored. Now, I've seen psychiatry many times tell them, oh, they're hallucinations, just ignore them. And you ask the patient, well, how'd that go? They go, didn't go well. They get louder when ignored. They
Mm.
consistently steer the victim away from anything that might generate joy or pleasure. They short circuit reason. They can manipulate feeling without, you're just sitting there and all of a sudden you feel bad.
But
So
this it doesn't, for me, it doesn't sound like something which is entirely specific only for people with schizophrenia. Even ordinary people or normal people, healthy people, let's put it like that, we also have sometimes weird thoughts in our minds, which normally, probably, for example, by myself, I wouldn't think something like that. It just feels like pops into my mind something which is weird and it doesn't belong to me. So
right,
it
that's
sounds
that's
like me that these entities are not targeting only people with
that's exact
schizophrenia.
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. They hit us all. So you could be walking down the road or something, just mind your own business, and all of a sudden you have this horrible thought coming into your head to do something really bad. Hit somebody, or you might be standing on the edge of a bridge and you have this thought to jump. Um, they hit us all, and you can tell. See, one of the things that psychology and psychiatry have completely ignored is where do thoughts come from? They completely ignore that. You know, thoughts don't come from you; they come from outside. Emanuel Swedenborg, a Christian mystic, said that none of your thoughts come from you. They either come from heaven or they come from hell. So, they do hit us all. You know,
But then
they
it means that one cure or one line of defense is not to believe them. When they tell you something which is weird, not to believe them. Because if you believe them, you get dragged into this negativity, you become their food.
right, and that's one of Sherry's programs that we've been giving out free to schizophrenics. Is that's a lie program because almost everything the voices tell people are lies. you know. And if you don't believe what they're saying, if you know that they're liars, then they can't get their clutches in you because you're not giving them any credence. They have to get you to believe them in order for them to take control of you. So schizophrenics, there's over 100,000 Americans diagnosed with schizophrenia every year, and this number is growing, right? So these entities are taking control of more and more people. Suicide is the leading cause of death of schizophrenics because these voices virtually always tell them to kill themselves, that they're no good, they're useless, nobody likes them. Just go ahead and get it over with. Just kill yourself and get it over with.
But what
So,
they do, it's a form of psychic torture.
yes, right. And you might ask yourself, like, well, if the patient is the food for these schizophrenic entities, for these negative entities, and if the patient kills themselves, what you know, what are they going to feed off of? If they've been feeding off their victim and the victim kills themselves, then they've killed their food source, like a bacteria kills its host. Well, what happens is that when somebody commits suicide, the whole family reacts in a negative, prolonged, torturous manner. They start blaming themselves, like, what did we do or what could we have done uh, to have helped this person? We didn't do enough. It's our fault. So they're creating a wider. Uh,
It's
uh,
like I'm sorry, I know that it sounds terrible, but it's like they have a never-ending buffet
yeah,
with negative energy from all kinds of people.
right. And none of these drugs that psychiatry is giving these people cure anything. Nothing. They are just treating symptoms.
Of course,
And the
you
reason,
cannot get rid of entities by taking pills.
and
It,
it doesn't get rid of mental illness either.
mm,
You know. So the reason they keep doing this is because the antidepressant drug market in the United States alone is scheduled to reach 15.98 billion, not million, $1 billion by 2023. And yet our suicide rate is over 50,000 a year. So what good are these things doing? And it's growing. It's growing. These
it's a
drugs
good,
aren't curing anything.
but it's good business.
It's great business for them. The global antipsychotic drug sales are scheduled to hit 14.54 billion in 2021 and expected to reach 15.5 billion by 2022. It's probably well over 15 billion a year now selling these drugs that are shrinking people's brains, that are doing physiological and psychological damage to them and only treating symptoms. And then these guys are telling the population that this is the only treatment we have. There is no other treatment. This is a life sentence. Once you get schizophrenia, you have to take our drugs. There's nothing else you can do about it, you know. So the suicide is the leading cause of death for schizophrenics. 4 out of 10 will attempt suicide. Um, and it's estimated that 4.9% of people with schizophrenia will die by killing themselves.
But it means then, because you have discovered that these are actually entities, there are patterns, and it means that you discovered the way to help people get rid of schizophrenia.
Yeah, if you can,
How
first of all, they have to understand that those thoughts are not theirs. They don't belong to them. They're coming in from the outside. Now, what's so tricky about this is that for the most part, those voices sound just like the thousands of other thoughts that go through the patient's head in a day. There's no, it's for the most part, there's no we're the voices, yeah, we're after weird and nothing like that. They sound just like the patient's normal thoughts, only the intent is very different. You know, they'll say, say things like "You're no good, you're stupid, you're ugly. Why did you say that?" Now they think this about you, or, it's always negative stuff that they're putting into the person's head.
it's
Um,
quite a lot of inner work required to pay attention to what thoughts you have in your mind, and then don't believe those negative, and also be aware that they are not yours.
Right.
You have to be aware almost all the time in order to do that.
And that's the first step between splitting them off, is if the voices, I've had, I don't know how many patients, they were curious about the voices too. They'd ask the voices, who are you? What are you? And the voices would respond, we are you. That's what they tell them time after time after time. We are you. They want the victim to believe that the voices they're hearing in their heads are them and belong to them. And that's kind of, it goes along with what, from the time we're little kids, we think that all thoughts that come into our head belong to us. You know,
Exactly.
nobody questions that. If it's in your head, it belongs to you. That's not the truth at all. You know, like I said, Swedenborg says none of your thoughts are yours, especially these negative ones. They come from outside of you. They want to control you. They want to turn your life miserable. They want to turn you into a food source. And they're poisoning kids with these drugs now too. I mean, um, it's shocking. Here now, this is old. These are old statistics. More than 7.2 million kids are on psychiatric drugs right now. Over 622,000 are under the age of 5. So these people have no conscience. They're giving these hardcore psychiatric drugs to kids under the age of 5. Over 80,000, and I think these are 2017 figures. Over 80,000 are on ADHD drugs, most of which are amphetamine. That's the devil's drug. The prisoners who have labeled amphetamine the devil's drug. That's what they call it in the prison. Over 38,000 kids under the age of 5 are on antidepressants. Yeah. Over 85,000 are on antipsychotics. These are the drugs that destroy your brain. And here's psychiatry feeding this stuff to kids. They have no moral conscience. Over
I
300.
I wonder if it is like that. I don't work either as a psychologist or psychiatrist, but I suppose that most of them, they really believe what they were told in school, what they learned in school, that these are the drugs that will help their patients. So they have good intentions when they prescribe drugs because they really believe this is it, this is the cure.
Yep, they're brainwashed into that, and they come out thinking that that's the truth. They don't understand that in 1910, the Carnegie Foundation and the Rockefeller Group sponsored something called the Flexner Report. Okay, so here's these people that belong to the drug companies. They're deep state industrialists. They've paid for this infamous Flexner Report that they paid millions for it, that shut down any medical school. And they gave this report to Congress and said, listen, drugs are the only thing that will cure medical problems, right? You know, naturopathy, acupuncture, Tesla's violet ray, all these other kinds of treatments that were coming out to treat people medically, they made illegal in 1910. Any doctor that prescribed any other source other than drugs would lose their license. So this report that they submitted to Congress and was made law shut down any medical school teaching subjects outside of mainstream pharmacology. So they took over the medical educational system at this time. The edict was so powerful that only a few medical schools survived, such as Johns Hopkins, McGill, and a handful of others connected with these industrialists who pushed through this garbage and made it into law by paying off Congress.
But
So,
this is ridiculous from a point of view because you mentioned acupuncture. So traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, they've been around for 5,000 years. They are
yep,
still around because they work. So making them illegal,
that's what they did. Doctors who practice any method beside pharmacology were threatened with the loss of their license. Now, So
Again, great
at
business.
that point, they took over the medical industry and they still are running it, especially in the area of psychology and psychiatry. They, any psychiatrist who steps outside of using drugs is suspect.
So you are a
So
suspect, Jerry.
the what?
You are a suspect.
I've been one for a while. So what I wanted to do is give you guys firsthand knowledge. Instead of just taking it from me, I'm bringing Judy on with me. So Judy was kind of taken over by these things as a young woman, and she struggled with them for years. Uh, so I've never seen anybody give a better um, story about what it's like to have to deal with these voices, what they were like, how they torment people, how they torture people. And um, Judy knows that they were entities, that they weren't hallucinations. Um, and I think what was it, 4 years, Judy? You struggled with these
Yeah,
things or more?
4 years.
Okay. So
Judy, I'm very grateful that you want to speak openly about this because it requires a lot of courage. But I'm also very grateful you do this because it will help other people going through something maybe similar to understand what they are dealing with, so they can do something about it. So I'm super, super, super grateful that you accepted the invitation.
Oh, thank you. Well, I wouldn't have talked about it years ago because there's so much stigma. And if you tell people you were schizophrenic, then you've got that stigma that carries, and you're treated a little bit differently. Um, but when I found out about Jerry and what Jerry was doing, I decided it was time to come out and see if Jerry would listen to me and to get my story out. Jerry offered to take me around on podcasts, and so I said, "Let's go. I think it's time. It's time."
it's rare for somebody who's had schizophrenia to come out and actually talk about it because, like Judy says, there is a stigma. Most
Of
people are
course.
afraid it's going to affect my work, it's going to affect my friends, it's going to affect my family. So it takes a pretty brave person to come out and say, "This is what actually happened. This is what I actually experienced."
So, Judy, please, would you share with us your story?
Yeah, how did it
Yeah.
start for you? How did it start?
Um, well, I'll give you a little bit of background first because these entities work, I think, with when they work on schizophrenics, they pick a particular type of person, I believe. And I was someone who had struggled as a kid. I grew up with alcoholic parents. I was not allowed to feel. I was not allowed to express emotion. So I had a very little identity. I didn't really know who I was. I didn't know what I felt. I was kind of trapped inside myself somewhere. And I went off to college not really having any skills emotionally to deal with the world because I hadn't been given anything from my family. All I did was survive. That was what I did. And I had attempted to commit suicide twice when I was in high school as I struggled and I didn't know how to cope. And then I went off to college, not knowing that this was going to be quite a ride. And when I got there, I got involved with some people with drugs. I got involved with LSD, and I spent about 9 months doing a tremendous amount of LSD, which really opened me up to all kinds of things, which I didn't realize at the time. Then I had one very bad trip that scared me, and I don't even remember what happened. It scared me so bad, I said, no more, no more LSD. I was still smoking a lot of pot, getting high, and drinking. And I got to my first year of college and I went home. And that summer, I was working as a waitress. And I started having episodes where I would be doing something and I'd just black out. My mind would black out. I wouldn't know where I was. I didn't know what I was doing. And it only lasted probably a couple of seconds, but it scared me to death because I thought, what is happening to me? And I didn't realize at the time I was beginning to really kind of break down. So that happened a couple of times. I went back to college. I was involved with a guy and I was very needy, and I really kind of wanted to become a part of kind of his identity because I didn't have much of my own. And he left college. He couldn't deal with me, so he left. And I tried to commit suicide. I took a bottle of pills, and I was lying on my dorm bed and thinking, well, I'm going to die. And then I just had this thought, if you die, you're going to hell. This is it for you. Pick up that phone and call somebody. So I did. And my roommate came, and I ended up waking up in the hospital with tubes coming out of my mouth, and I pulled them all out, screaming and yelling. And so I got out of the hospital, and I was funneled into the mental health system at that time. And at the same time, and this happened 50 years ago, so it's hard to remember little details of when things happened. But around the same time, I was in my dorm room smoking pot, getting high, and while I was just stoned out of my mind, I envisioned a door, this great big door, this big wood, kind of like a medieval castle type door. And I had done so much LSD, I'd walked through portals when I was on LSD. My friends and I.
If I might ask something, because you mentioned that when you were taking drugs, you had one bad trip because it opened you up to something. So for me, I translated that when you take drugs, you become open also to these, let's say, subtle dimensions. So these entities can access you easier.
Mm-hmm.
I translate it like that. Is it true?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you're opening a door in your life. You're allowing, you're giving permission in a sense for whatever is coming at you. So I saw this door. I was stoned out of my mind. I thought, well, it's a portal. I'll walk through this portal. No big deal. So in my mind, I walked to that door and I opened that door and stepped inside, and it was just this very white, blank world. I shut the door behind me, and then the voices started. And there were 4 of them. And I named them. There were 3 men and there was a woman voice. And they began to mentally torment me. And they began to argue in their torment over me. One would tell me that I was crazy. The other one, and they were actually positioned 2 in front and 2 behind me. I could hear them. I could feel them. I could feel their presence. And they would argue over how crazy I was. One would say I was crazy, and then would say, oh, she's not that crazy. She's just nuts. And then another would say, oh, don't pick on her. She's just a silly little thing. And another would say, oh, she's a piece of crap. And they would go on. And they would talk, and they talked constantly. So at that time was around the time I ended up in the mental health system. I had to go before a panel of psychiatrists to see if I could stay on the outside or be put in a hospital because I tried to commit suicide. They decided I could stay on the outside. And my psychiatrist put me on 3 drugs, 2 for psychosis and 1 for side effects. When I got on the drugs at first, they made me nearly blind for I don't know how long, a couple of days, a week. I just remember lying in my dorm room and everything was a blur. I couldn't see. I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't do anything.
Judy, what did you think those voices were when they first started?
I didn't know. They scared me to death because they intimidate. They intimidate you. They overpower you. They have a presence as well as a voice. For me, the presence was so overwhelming that I didn't know. And I really didn't ask. I just...
Was it overwhelming, like they wanted to override your willpower?
They overrode my thoughts. They didn't want me to think. They paralyze your mind in a lot of ways. Like something happened, you get real scared and you stop and you're just paralyzed. They do that to your mind. So you can't think through things. You're locked. You're locked into listening to them. So they dominate. But not only do they dominate, but they can be very, very loud. And they would be so loud sometimes that I couldn't hear the people around me.
Wow.
They would completely block out what I was hearing. And like I would go to the student union with my friends and they'd be talking and I could hear noise in the background, but I couldn't discern it because I had all this stuff going on in my head.
They did the same thing with people in church. They would block out the preacher. They'd get so loud, they'd block out whatever the preacher was saying.
Yeah. And yeah, they had that power. So I didn't know what it was. I thought, Jenna, I thought that my mind had snapped. I thought that my mind had fragmented, and that these were fragments of myself. That's the only way I could explain it. But I didn't know how to get these fragments and put them back together because they weren't cooperative. You know, they didn't want to be put back together. They didn't want to do anything but torment me. So they told me that I was worthless, I was useless. I've got a list of things they told me. They told me I was never going to be free, that this was the end for me. This was the end of life for me as I knew it. It was over. I was never going back to the life that I had. They told me to give up, kill myself, do the world a favor, and just get rid of myself because nobody wanted me. So I went into horrible self-rejection. I began to hate myself.
This is all very common. Hundreds of schizophrenics I've spoke to, that's the same story.
Yeah. And my mother had a breakdown when I was 13. So they told me that since my mother had a breakdown, this was my turn. I had to have a breakdown. I had to go crazy. There was no other road for me. And they also told me I'd ruined myself. I'd ruined myself because I'd done these drugs. I'd ruined myself because I had done whatever I had done. I was kind of a wild teenager. I'd done a lot of crazy stuff. So they told me this was the path I put myself on and that I really had no value anymore. And then they would tell me that I was going to be punished. So that's where the paranoia comes in, because they tell you there's punishment coming. People were coming for me. I didn't know who was coming, but they convinced me somebody was coming. And I knew that I was going to be punished. I didn't know what I was going to be punished for, but I knew that I was bad. I mean, they convinced me I was just bad. I thought somebody was going to come lock me up. And I waited for it. When the phone rang, I would jump because I thought, this is the phone call. This is the phone call. They're going to tell me we're coming for you. Or somebody knock on the door, I would jump because I thought they're going to come. They're going to take me away. And I didn't know why. And a part of the torment was not understanding any of this. If I thought these four voices were four parts of myself, why was there nothing good? And Georgiana, in that world, there is nothing good. There is no peace. There is no love. There is no break. This goes on 24/7. It never ends. It wakes you up in the middle of the night. You wake up in the morning thinking it'll be different. It's never different. They don't ever let go of you. And
so that's non-stop torture.
It is hell. If you know, it is a literal hell. It was like, I tell people, it was like being thrown in a hole that's 250 feet deep and having people look down and say, well, that's it for you, and walking away, and there's no way out. And I was in that hole, and there was nobody that could get me out. And I couldn't tell my friends that I was hearing voices because I didn't want them to think I was crazy. But they knew I was kind of crazy because I did kind of crazy stuff and said kind of crazy things. And so they handled me. People handle you when you're mentally ill. They handle you. And so there's this terrible aloneness. You know, there's my identity, what little I had, was totally shattered. I had no identity. I didn't know who I was. I actually believed at one point that if I could crawl mentally inside somebody else's head, I could take their identity and I'd have an identity. I mean, that's how crazy it got, because I wanted so much to be someone, but I didn't feel like I was anyone. I had no definition. I was a blur, just a blur. So there's, constant feelings of despair and emptiness, lostness, hopelessness, constantly, 24 hours a day. And Jerry talked earlier about how they would suck the energy out of you. So the way I understand it, the way it happened for me is when the attacks, because there would be attacks and then it would lessen up, but the presence was always there. But when the attacks would come in, they would really attack. I would fight with everything I had to get through it, because you're trying to maintain yourself. And I learned after a while that there were deeper levels of insanity that I could go to. I could see where this would totally eventually rob me. And there would be, and I wouldn't even know anything. I wouldn't be conscious of anything. I'd be gone. And I knew there were levels of that, and I knew they were pushing me to that. And it was like being in a 24/7 panic attack that you're never going to escape. And Twilight was terrible time when the darkness came, because this world, and it's these beings, you know, they're interdimensional. And so when they are attacking like that, you live in a part of their world, in a part of their dimension. So the way I explained it to Jerry is you're living in the world, okay, but you're living in this other world. And in the real world, all you're doing is what's expected of you. You're play acting. You're doing what you think you're supposed to do, but you're not really participating, and you're not going anywhere in that world, because the world you really live in is this world in your head that's being controlled, and you're constantly fighting to save yourself, and you don't know how. I mean, I spent days and weeks and months trying to figure out, how do I fix this? How do I fix this? How do I make this stop? And there was no answer. And the psychiatrist, you know, he told me, well, this is forever. So it was a death sentence. It was a death
Really
sentence.
sounds like that. It really sounds like that.
Yeah, it was a death sentence in the world, and it was a death sentence for my mind. And so I thought more and more about suicide. But at one point, these voices told me to kill one of my friends. I had a friend who had gotten me involved in LSD, and we were sitting in a lounge one day, and there was a big lamp with a big heavy metal base. And voices told me, pick up that lamp and crush his skull in. He's the one that did this to you. He got you into drugs. He destroyed you. He ruined you. He deserves to die. So bash his brains in until there's nothing left in his head. And I didn't. Interesting thing was, I was suicidal, but I wasn't homicidal. I liked people. So that was not going to work on me. But get me to kill myself, that was likely to work. And then, you know, there was also often a loss of time. I'd find myself in places and wonder how I got there, and find out that I'd been missing for 3 days and had no idea where I'd been. And trying to think what else. And then sometimes I would look in the mirror and I didn't really recognize myself. I'd look at myself, but my identity was so shattered that I didn't know who I was. So I would look at myself and I think, well, maybe that's who I am. I don't know. I mean, I just didn't know who I was. I mean, they stole everything. So I'll tell you a little bit, you know, about a typical day. I've got a lot of notes here, so if I read some, excuse me for doing that, but I have a lot of them. So I could wake up to the screaming and the torment in my head, and then the anxiety would start, and I would obsess over ways to get rid of it. So obsession became a part of this whole thing. Obsessing, how do I get rid of them? What do I do? On top of that, you have this hypervigilance, this emotional hypervigilance, because you never know when they're going to attack. You never know when they're coming. You never know when somebody's going to knock on the door and they're going to come take you away. And so you live in that hypervigilance all the time.
So basically, you were scared all the time.
All the time. And wondering, what did I do? What did I do to deserve this? Now, around that time, early on, I became a Christian. I accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, thinking that this was going to solve all my problems. And I found that it didn't solve anything. And these voices hated it. And they would tell me that Jesus was a weakling. Why would I follow this God who was a weakling? He allowed people to kill him. He's dead. You know, why am I bothering myself with this? And they would remind me this over and over. Jesus was a weakling. And but I continued to read my Bible. I continued to hang out with some of the Christians on campus that I knew. But I was withdrawn. I was confused most of the time. Sometimes I didn't know where I was, what I was doing. And as those drugs, and Jerry talked about these drugs being major tranquilizers, as these drugs get a hold of you, and they get a hold of you pretty quickly, the voices do tamp down some, and it sounds more, like Jerry was saying, more like your own voice. So it's like you're talking to yourself in your head. You begin to think, you know, these are the parts of me that are talking to me, and I can't control these parts of me. And at that point, too, when all this was going on, my dad, especially after the suicide attempt, my dad called me to come home. So I flew home, and he took me, I had a boat, he took me out on a boat, and he told me that I needed to just stop it. Whatever I was doing, whatever game I was playing, I needed to stop it. And he told me, don't come home until you do. I don't want to see you. Wow. So my family abandoned me. And So this went on from my sophomore year till my last year of college. And finally, because I couldn't study, I finally flunked out of college. I think I ended up with a 1.3 because I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't get anywhere on time. I couldn't do anything. And I ended up living in a sorority house. I belonged to a sorority. I did do that. I joined a sorority. I thought that would help me too, but that didn't help. And I ended up living in a sorority house. And at that point, then my whole life had collapsed. I had school had been my life. I had no family to go to. My family didn't want me. I had no money. At that point, I was on welfare, on government support. And I had no future, I had nowhere to go. So I was living, it was a summer that Richard Nixon was impeached. And I sat on the couch and watched Richard Nixon get impeached and planned how to kill myself. Because I thought there's nothing left. There's no family, there's no life, so it's time to go. And I always kind of knew that I would die. I knew I'd either kill myself or they would kill me somehow. So that time came. It came that summer. So I had a little Volkswagen Bug that I bought before I got sick. And I went out and cut a hose and put the hose in the exhaust and got in the car and put the hose in the car and shut the window as much as I could and started the car up and sat there and waited to die. And a friend of mine, a really good friend, she was in the sorority house. She sensed something was wrong. I don't know how or why. She came running out. She saved me and got me out of the car. So I went to see my psychiatrist soon after that, and I told him I need help because if you don't help me, I'm going to die. I'm going to kill myself. I said that's where I'm at. So he asked me what I wanted to do, and I had heard about this program, this like a 4-month secretarial program in the next city over in Syracuse, New York. And I had some Christian friends that lived in Syracuse. And I thought I'll go to Syracuse and I'll be with them and they'll help me. They'll take care of me. I'll go to the school and then I can get a job because I didn't know how I'd ever work. How was I going to work when I'm hearing all these voices and all this stuff is going on? I told him, if you don't help me, I'm going to kill myself. So he did. He got me money through a disability program. He got me accepted in the school. And I moved into a house with 5 or 6 Christian women. And I started going to school, but I could not interact with them. I could not have relationship. You can't have relationships because you got all this craziness going on in your head and they're living in the real world. And the real world really means nothing to you other than going through the paces of what you have to do to try to look normal because you're in this battle all the time. And so they had a really difficult time with me because I was totally uncooperative. I was totally hostile. I was just so messed up. And I started going to that secretarial school, and then I decided, well, maybe I should commit myself. If I commit myself, maybe they'll be able to help me. So there was a psychiatric hospital in Syracuse. So I went down there and knocked on the door, and I asked them if I could commit myself. And the psychiatrist there told me no, I couldn't. I don't know why. He told me that. So he asked me to come in. I talked to him for a while. And then he said, well, I'll tell you what. He says, I'm not allowed to bring anybody in from outside, but I'll see you a couple times a week. So I said, okay. I made a drink of water. So I started seeing him. And then he turned me over to this other counselor who he was fresh out of college. I don't even think he had a master's. And he was this Catholic guy. And I talked to him for a month or two. And then one day he said to me, do you really want help? And I said, yeah, I do. And he said, well, you're not doing anything that's going to help you. You're just talking around everything in circles. And he said, if you really want help, then you have to deal with some of your problems. I said, like what? He said, well, you're bitter and you're angry and you're resentful and you're hateful. And he said, and he was a good Catholic boy. He said, that's all sin. So you need to deal with that in your life. He said, I think if you deal with that, you'll you'll feel better. And I was like, okay. I mean, I didn't have anything else to do. It's like, okay, we'll try that. We'll see if that works. So I worked with him for many, many months, and he began to help me talk about what had happened to me in my childhood. I mean, I had been molested when I was 3 years old by a stranger. There were a lot of things that had happened to me. I'd been molested by several other older men when I was a teenager. I had my family with all the alcoholism and the fighting, and then my mother leaving when I was 13. It traumatized me. And I was very angry and I was bitter about my family. And he helped me get all that. And for months, I just cried. I'd go 3 times a week and I would cry. And I would cry and I would cry. And as I began to get that stuff out, I began to start to feel more powerful. I began to develop an identity. I began to develop back more towards feeling like myself. Because in that whole 4 years of being a schizophrenic, you never feel like yourself.
I would ask Jerry a question. Is this something common for people with schizophrenia, trauma in their
Yes.
early years?
Yeah, virtually. If you look into the background of virtually any schizophrenic, there's a lot of trauma.
Okay.
You know, it's
very
common.
I think that these entities, Georgiana, I think they began to groom me as a kid. I think they talked to me as a kid. I think they told me that I was, that I wasn't any good because I had a really bad self-image. I think that they pushed me into things that I didn't want to do. I got involved with people. I got involved with organized crime when I was 17, which I thought was like fun. That was big fun. But I think they groom you until you get weak enough that they can take over. And when I look back, I was perfect food. I was perfect food for them. I was everything that they like to live off of. So I began with this counselor I began to feel some days almost normal. But I'd still have these attacks that would come, and then my brain would freeze, and I would, the paranoia would come back and all that stuff. So I was going to this Methodist church in Syracuse, and I lived in the University District with the students. And one Sunday I went in, and there was this woman, this preacher from Philadelphia. Her name was Evelyn Carter. She was there, and she spoke. And I was sitting listening to her, and then I went home, and I thought, I think she knows something. I just had this sense, I think she could help me. I think she could help me. I called the elders and said I would like to meet with her. And they said, okay, come on over. So I drove over and met with her. And she was a neat lady. So I sat with her, and she said, well, tell me what's going on. So I told her. I sat and I started telling the story, and she listened for a couple of minutes. Then she just put her hand up. She said, stop, Judy, stop. She said, I'll tell you what's going on. And I said, what? And she said, you're dealing with demons. You're dealing with demons. And I was like, demons. Well, I knew from reading the Bible that demons existed. I knew from reading the Bible that demons possessed people. I knew that they oppressed people. So it wasn't a new concept, but it was scary to think that for 4 years I'd had demons all over me. And she said to me, well, I can help you get rid of them. And I said, okay. So she gave me this little book, a little Bible promise book. She said, so when they talk to you and when they overwhelm you, I want you to take out this book and read scripture to them. He says, and you command them in the name of Jesus to go. You tell them they have no right to you. They cannot infect your life and they have to go. And I just kind of sat and looked at her like, okay, okay, it's going to be that easy, huh? And so I left, and and Jerry's asked me many times, how I felt after that. I was encouraged, and I was horrified. I was horrified that it could quote be that simple, that she would think it was so simple. But I was encouraged that at least somebody had some idea what was going on. So I was working. I finished, actually, I flunked out of the secretarial school, but they got me a job at the local newspaper, and I was working on the copy desk, and I was typing computer code for them, and which was good work for me because it was rote. It was constant repetition, same codes over and over. So that I didn't have to think much. So I'd go to work, and I took my little pocket promise book with me, and then this attack came on me. So I got up, and I ran into the ladies' room, made sure there was nobody in there, and I locked myself in a little booth. And I took out that little book, and I started reading scripture out loud. And I said, "In the name of Jesus Christ, you have to go. You have no power, no authority in me. Be gone." I read the scripture, and then it left. Instantly, it left. Schizophrenia left. The voices left. The oppression left. The darkness left. All left. I was like, whoa. I was myself. Well, I
But
thought that was.
this is absolutely wonderful because others can do the same.
Well, but then the battle began. They don't give up easily.
I can imagine that.
So the battle went on for several months where I'd get rid of them and then they'd come back, and I'd get rid of them and then they'd come back. But by that time I realized, okay, now I have the key. Now I know what I have to do. Now I know I can win. Now I know I can get my life back. So I was determined to beat them. And around that same time, my counselor said to me, because I was doing so much better and I was having this victory, and I didn't tell him I heard voices. I didn't tell him any of that stuff. And but I was doing better, and I was functioning, and I was building relationships. I was starting to get involved in life again. Because when you're schizophrenic, you have no relationships. You have no connections. You're disconnected from people. You're disconnected from your community, and you're disconnected from God and spiritual things. And so I began to connect again, and he could see, I talked about people and people that I was spending time with. And he said, well, it's time to get off your pills, because I was still on these drugs. And I was scared to death because I thought, well, what if I get off these pills and then all this comes back? What if none of this is real? Maybe this is a big trick. But I decided, well, I'm going to do it. I'm going to get off. I don't want to be on these pills. So I said, well, how do I do it? He said, just stop them. I don't know if that was the right way to do it or not. So I just stopped them after 4 years of being on these drugs. I stopped them. And for about 3 or 4 days, I went through withdrawal. And I had shakes, and I had paranoia, and I had fear, and I had all kinds of sweating. It was a drug withdrawal. And then I woke up. It was 1974. It was Easter morning. I woke up, and I got up, and the drugs were out of my system, and the sweats were gone, and the withdrawal was gone, and my mind was clear, and I was back to normal.
This is, I'm simply, I don't even find words, as you notice, because this can help so many people who deal with the same thing, maybe not as badly as you did, but this can help so many people because if you understand what it is about and you also have a key what to do, it can help so many people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Well,
I've had patients that once they found out that the voices weren't them, there was one guy said, okay, I got it from here. Because they're very confused about what these things are. They're very curious. They're not sure what they are. But once somebody tells them, listen, this isn't you, that helps a lot. Just like Judy found out. It's like, okay, good. It's not me.
Yes, because it's like you described it, Judy, you got your identity back. You got yourself back. So this can help a lot of people, just understanding those nasty thoughts. They are not you, they come from somebody else, which is external to you. So you can simply say, no, I will not allow you to take over me.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing, Georgiana, that I had to go through after that was after 4 years of constant negativity in my mind, I had to rebuild my thoughts. I had to rebuild my mind to think positively because I hadn't been able to think anything positive in 4 years. So everything was a negative to me. So I began to learn how to turn everything back into a positive. And that took time. I spent a lot of time reading the Bible. That helped me because it put positive into me. I spent a lot of time talking to people. I spent a lot of time in prayer. I spent a lot of time really rethinking who I was and who I wanted to be. But those 4 years, you know, when those entities get a hold of you, they do shatter so much of you. They steal so much. So even though I came out of that and I was me and I knew I was me and I knew I was normal, I still had to rebuild my self-image, what I thought about myself. You know, I had to constantly recognize that self-hatred would creep in, and I'd have to tear it down and say, nope, that's not where I'm going, because the thinking becomes a habit. So you have to undo that, and that took time. That took time. But I was able to go on. I never went on drugs again. I was never schizophrenic again, and I went on with my life and married and raised kids and had several careers and have been fine.
But this is something also I emphasize on it. This is something for all of us, because all of us from time to time we have weird thoughts. So we need to understand they are not ours, and we have to hold on to as you said, to build up the positive and have it as the main stream of our minds. You don't have to be schizophrenic to have negative thoughts or feel bad or put down yourself. We all can relate to that to a certain degree. Not as badly as you went through, but we all go through something like that. I can speak for myself, so I'm not having all the time only happy thoughts. And when the weird thoughts, I am aware that they are not mine. And I have my toolkit, so to say, to get rid of them. So I don't allow them to eat my energy. I even tell myself I don't want to be their food. I will not allow them to eat my energy. I will not allow them to drag me down. But this is more or less a daily practice, because they will not, as you said, even when you understood what it was, it took you time to build up, to restructure your mind. So
Well,
I think
one thing they hate is the 23rd Psalm. I've had many patients tell me that they react to the 23rd Psalm like worms thrown on a hot frying pan. So and they hate Psalm 91 too, but especially Psalm 23. They can't stand it.
But there are people who are not that much into religion, so they need to understand that even though they will not read the Bible or the Psalms, they still need to understand how it works. So there is a solution. There is a solution to that. So maybe not everybody will just pick up the Psalms and read them, but there is a solution to that.
Yeah,
If
there is a path back to sanity.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes,
but it's
exactly.
not through psychiatry and taking those pills. That's going to make things worse. Unfortunately, they have the power and they have the media.
Yeah. Well, here's an example, Georgiana. My daughter, my youngest daughter, when she was in her teens, went through a year of being very depressed. And we did everything we could to help her, and nothing helped her. She missed, like, I don't know, 30, 40 days of school that year. And I went into her one day, I was just beside myself. And I went in and I said to her, what are you dealing with? What are you thinking? You know, if you could give me like 3 or 4 words, what are they? Well, depression, anger, fear, whatever. And I said to her, I said, if a bird came and it flew and it landed on your head, would you allow it to stay and build a nest? And she said, well, no. I said, if somebody knocked on your door and you said, who is it? And they said, fear. I said, would you let it in? And she says, well, I do. I said, why? Why do you receive everything that comes to you? Well, she said, I thought I had to. I said, well, think about it. If this stuff comes in like birds, And Bill said, "Unless you're going to have a family of birds on top of your head, what would you want that for? Why would you want to let this stuff in?" She said, "Well, I thought I had to." And I said to her, "You don't. You don't have to let any of it in. You can say, no, sorry, not today." She was over her depression in like 3 days. Grabbed that concept, ran with it, came out of her room one day as if she hadn't ever been depressed, and she was fine.
But this is because in school, in family and in school, nobody teaches us how we actually function as a human being. We don't have a manual. This is what it means to be a human being. These are the thoughts, they work like that. These are your emotions and feelings, they work like that. You can deal with them in this manner. You don't have to take in everything. We don't have this manual to what it means to be a human being. So it sounds so obvious that, of course, you don't have to take in everything, but nobody teaches us this.
No. Matter of fact, it's the opposite. You turn on the TV and it's violence and murder and sex and scandal. It's just the world is just full of this bullcrap, and they don't call programs for nothing. When you turn on that TV and you're watching violence, you're being programmed. When you're playing negative video games, violent video games, you're being programmed. And when you're watching murder mysteries or war stories, you're being programmed.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's the opposite. It's the opposite of what should be going on.
Mm-hmm. And I work with a lot of women who come to me who have some kind of negative garbage going on in their life. I had one gal come to me, and she had such guilt. She had a daughter who was autistic. She was convinced she'd ruined her. She was convinced it was her fault that her daughter was autistic. She lived in all this guilt. And I said, "You don't have to live with this." I said, let's just tear it down. Tear it down in the name of Jesus. Let's just pull it down, command it to go. So we did. And then she looked at me and she goes, "Oh my gosh," she goes, "I'm so light. It's gone. It's gone." I said, "You don't have to tolerate this stuff. There's no reason to tolerate it." And I work with women all the time, and that's kind of what I do. I don't deal with schizophrenics. I find people that are seriously mentally ill, it's very difficult to convince them it's not them. They don't believe it. They just don't believe it. I have a girlfriend whose daughter is schizophrenic, and I said to her, "I can tell you how to cure her." And I told her, and she says, I don't believe it. I don't believe it." And I said, "It can't be helped." But there's a lot of people, just everyday people running around that are bound up by some negative garbage, and trying to teach people you don't have to receive that. You can say, "No, go, be gone, get out of here," and it goes.
Yeah, it's I realized this many years ago with the negative thoughts that were coming into my mind, and I have as a strategy. Either I tell myself or tell these entities, I refuse completely to listen to you, completely and absolutely. I refuse to listen to you. I don't believe you. You cannot take hold of me. So this is my strategy when negative thoughts pop into my mind. I will not allow them to take hold on myself.
Good.
Yeah.
But this is because I do a lot of self-work, so to say, and practice a lot of spirituality. Not everybody has right now access to this. So what you say, both you, Jerry, and you, Judy, it's gold worth because there is a solution. So you don't accept it to be true. You understand that there is an entity actually taking over your mind, making you believe that it is you who have these thoughts. So when you understand this, then you can refuse. You can say no. You can do something to say, as you taught your daughter, if birds will come onto your head, you will not allow them to build a nest there. It's of course not.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too that I recommend to people is don't let yourself don't get yourself emotionally in a position where you're easy pickings for them. Don't build up resentments. Don't build up hatred. Don't unforgiveness. Unforgiveness was a big one for me. I went through with this counselor a couple of weeks of forgiving, and forgiving was so freeing for me emotionally. It cleaned out so much garbage in my life. So I say to people, don't make yourself food. Don't be an easy target, because those things make you an easy target, because they are looking for the weakest. They're looking for the most broken, and they're the easiest to take down. And I was an easy target. I was just filled with all kinds of negative garbage.
Yeah, they're like sharks in the ocean that smell blood. They can sense when somebody's putting off negative vibrations, and then they go after the weakest, and then they attack.
Yeah, so basically, maybe we can say like that, when you work with yourself and you build up as a human being who is optimistic and positive and do your best to stay that way, they don't have a door to enter your system.
Yeah, and you have to keep aware of the thoughts that are coming into your mind. Sometimes, you're just not paying attention, and they can get in there, and all of a sudden you start thinking negative stuff and you're not even aware of it. You got to be aware of what's coming into your mind, and kind of where it's coming from. All that negative stuff is coming from the dark side.
Yeah, well, we're fighting against authorities and rulers and powers in the dark world. That's what they are. They rule the dark world, and they're spiritual forces of evil.
And they're
And
always around.
And you can see it playing out in the world now.
Yes.
You can see their influence everywhere, in media and government, everywhere. And I don't know that people are aware of that. Although I notice that a lot more people have come to the recognition that there's something going on. It's spiritual. It's dark. It's not good in the world today. People are finally getting that. They don't fully understand it, and a lot of people understand it in different ways, according to whatever their worldview is. But I had no idea that I was dealing with dark forces.
Most don't.
Whoever told us that?
But isn't this their greatest trick, to make people believe they don't exist?
Right.
Yep.
That's exactly the greatest trick.
Yep. Satan can disguise himself as an angel of light.
Yeah, and they do that to start with. Lots of times they'll come and they'll go, "Oh, I can help you. I can give you special powers. I can be your friend. They can turn themselves into whatever they want to turn themselves into. And then if the person buys into it, they're like, then they get hooked. Playing with Ouija boards is one of the most dangerous things that kids could do. They're letting them in when they do that. Amphetamines is another one. Amphetamines will open you up and they just jump in. The prison was full of amphetamine addicts that were hearing voices, demonic voices.
It's terrible to hear about it, but in the same time, it's also great to hear about it, because there is an explanation and there is a solution. So there is hope. There is a solution. There is hope. It's not a life sentence anymore.
Right. And see, that's something that psychiatry's been pushing on these poor people. There is no hope. It's a life sentence. It's a very dark message. There's no hope to it. You have to take these toxic drugs for the rest of your life. There is nothing else you can do. It's a bad message.
Yes, it is.
And it's a lie.
The other thing is that psychiatrists do not know what it's like to live that life. Living that life is a horror. So when they tell people you're going to have to live this your whole life, to me, it was a death sentence. It's just a matter of when will I die, because there's no hope. They take all your hope. If you're going to be like that forever, what hope is there in living? Why go on living? And as a schizophrenic, you live with that every day. Do I want to live today? Is today the day I want to die? Is it worth living another day? Is it worth fighting another day? I mean, you battle that all the time.
And you look at the suicide rate of schizophrenics, and that Judy's saying plays out. They kill themselves at a rate 5 times higher than the normal population. And this message that psychiatry is giving these poor people, it's downright evil. There is no hope. There's nothing you can do. You're helpless. The only thing you could do is take these drugs. And what gives them the authority to do that? They don't even know what they're dealing with. They don't even know what the cause of schizophrenia is. And yet they display themselves as the experts, the high priests of mental health. And they're the
But
ones that are running the institutions around the world.
it's not what gives them the authority. It's simply ignorant and the teachings they get in school. They really believe it.
Yeah, they believe it. And anybody stands up against them, they get all flustered. They can't deal with it. Yet they have no research to back themselves up. They're not curing anybody. Those drugs are doing people damage. They don't know what causes schizophrenia. They haven't investigated the voices. They're off in Lululand, making billions of dollars selling these toxic drugs to people based on lies.
Well, and I'll tell you a funny story too. After I got rid of this stuff and got married and moved and built a life, whatever, my husband and I went back to visit my old college one time. And I said, let's go visit my psychiatrist, Dr. Thompson. I like Dr. Thompson. He was Scottish and he had a great accent and he was a nice guy, but he was, he was a nice guy, but he was a psychiatrist. So I said, let's go see him. So my husband said, okay. So I went and he remembered me. And this was 12, 13 years later. So I went to see him. The county mental health center had moved. So he went looking for my file, but my file was gone. I'm going, thank God it's gone. Nobody will ever find it. So I sat down to talk to him and I told him I was fine. And he goes, what happened? And I couldn't tell him. Because he'd think I was crazy. If I told him that I had demons, I got rid of the demons. So I couldn't tell him. So I told him, well, I found this counselor in Syracuse and he worked with me 3 days, a week. He goes, well, yeah, that's a big thing, because you really need that counseling, a lot of counseling. But I couldn't tell him what I had done because he'd think I was crazy. He'd think I was still schizophrenic if I told him that.
Yeah, they can't deal with it.
Yeah. And so I found, through my life that I couldn't tell people what had happened. I wrote a book about it. I sold it when I was 28 to Doubleday. They published it. It's now out of print, so nobody can find it. And then I hid. We did it anonymously. I did it with a pen name. But you can't tell people. I never told people in my church. Because when I was crazy, and I was crazy, people, I did and said things that drove people away from me. People don't, people are like, whoa, they don't want to be me because you're so nuts.
Right.
There are people now that I can find on Facebook that I knew then, and they're like, they'll say things like, I don't start relationships with people I knew in the past. Rid of me really quick. So you still get that rejection because nobody believes that you can overcome it. Nobody believes that you can get well and that you can be normal. So I gave up trying to tell people until I met Jerry. So I realized, oh, well, Jerry gets it. Jerry knows. I can tell Jerry this story. And so I spent my whole life just being very quiet about it.
And the voices themselves tell the victim, don't tell anybody about us. They'll think you're crazy. They'll lock you up and then they'll put you on medicines. We're warning you, don't tell anybody about us that we exist.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, their greatest trick.
Yep.
But we will get this message out. So I really hope that it will help people when they watch these episodes. I am very, very grateful that you took your time and you shared the story. I am super, super grateful because it's a message of hope and it also offers a solution. It's not a life sentence. There is hope.
It's not a death sentence.
And I have a website and and I've had people from podcasts I've done contact me there to ask questions. My website is strategiesforovercomers.com. And if people email me, I'll answer questions. I'll correspond with people. I've had several women that have contacted me and have been helped just by knowing the truth. There's something about getting the truth out there that opens when you pour light on darkness, darkness goes away. Darkness is
exactly.
dispelled. So I'm willing to, correspond and email with people who have questions and who are struggling. I'd be happy to.
I will put the links in the text of the episode of the podcast so people can contact you.
Okay, and we have a free program that Sherry Sweeney came up with. She was like Judy. She fought voices as a youngster, and using this program, she broke free of them. So it's on my website at jerrymarzinsky.com. Go to articles and then go to the That's a Lie program and study it and put it to use against the voices right away. It'll weaken them.
I will put that link also in the description so people can have access to it. Because it's very, very important.
You might want to send this to Misa too. I think they'd be interested in hearing what Judy had to say.
Well, and I think also this also is true of any type of mental illness, obsessive compulsive, depression. I believe it's all demonic. It's all demonically created and engineered, and people are groomed into these things. It applies to all of them.
So I encourage the listeners to go to the links in the description and please do read the articles and contact Judy if you have any questions, because there is hope. There is a solution. You can understand what happens to you and put a stop to it. There is a solution and a hope.
There is a solution and there is hope, and it's not a death sentence. That's all a lie.
So I hope that this will spread as much as possible and it will reach out as many as possible, because we all need it. We don't have to suffer from schizophrenia. We all go through having negative thoughts and weird ideas from time to time. They are not ours. We can put a stop to them. Thank you so much. I am very grateful that we had a chance to listen to you, and I really hope that this will help a lot of people, because we all need it. We all need to hear this.
Thank you for letting me tell my story. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
You both are very welcome.